Reed Halvorson pushed open the door to the Yorkville condominium just after 5 in the morning, his dress shirt untucked and his collar carrying the faint trace of a perfume that did not belong to his wife. The city was still dark outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Lake Ontario a black mirror below the city lights. He loosened his tie and called out her name. No answer. The nursery door was open. He crossed the hallway and stopped at the threshold. The 2 cribs, white-painted wood, they had spent an entire Saturday assembling, were empty. The drawers that held tiny folded sleepers, the ones his wife had organized by color the week before the twins arrived, hung open and bare. A sound left his throat that was not quite a word. He moved through the apartment like a man checking rooms after a fire. The master bedroom with its half-emptied closet, the bathroom still faintly smelling of her shampoo, the kitchen where a USB drive sat beside a folded envelope on the marble island. He stood over it for a long moment before his hands moved. Reed, by the time you read this, I know everything. The children and I are safe. My lawyer will be in touch. Do not call. Noemi. He pressed the USB drive between his fingers and thought back to all the nights he had told himself. She was too tired, too distracted, too focused on the babies to notice anything at all. He had been so certain of that. He had been wrong. Noemi Chartrand had arrived in Toronto on a brittle October morning 3 years earlier, carrying a single checked bag and a job offer from St. Michael's Hospital. She had grown up in Moncton, New Brunswick, the kind of city that felt either too small or exactly right depending on the year, and she had spent the last decade becoming the kind of ER nurse that residents quietly hoped was on shift when things went sideways. She met Reed Halvorson at a gallery opening in the Distillery District, an event a colleague had dragged her to on a Friday she'd almost stayed home for. He was tall and composed, the kind of man who filled a room without seeming to try. He brought her a glass of sparkling water when he noticed she hadn't touched the wine, and he asked about her work with what felt like genuine interest. By December, she had moved her shampoo into his bathroom. By February, she had agreed to marry him. The Yorkville condo felt like a city she hadn't earned the keys to. Polished concrete floors, custom cabinetry, a view that made the world look manageable from a distance. Reed walked her through it the week before the wedding, pointing out things he'd chosen himself. The kitchen island. The reading corner, he said, was for her. She didn't notice, not then, that every document she'd signed carried only his name. The early months were good enough to remember as happy. Noemi worked long-year shifts. Reed managed real estate developments across the GTA, always presenting, always entertaining, always some client who needed dinner at a restaurant she'd never been to. He would come home and ask about her shift and genuinely listen, at least for a while. He told her he admired how steady she was under pressure. She believed him. The first real crack arrived over something so small she almost missed it. She had been called back to the hospital for a trauma on a Thursday evening, missing a dinner he had arranged with 2 potential investors. When she walked in at 11, Reed was sitting on the couch in the dark. "You made me look like I don't have a stable home life," he said. His voice was calm. That was the part that unsettled her more than anger would have. She had just spent 4 hours helping keep a 19-year-old alive. She apologized anyway. He slept in the guest room, and by morning he was pleasant again, and she convinced herself it had been stress. When she found out she was carrying twins, she told him in the kitchen on a Sunday, still holding the test. He hugged her. His smile was technically correct, but something in it didn't reach. Some warmth she had come to expect was missing, like a pilot light that had quietly gone out. He said they'd make it work. The phrasing stayed with her. He came to the early appointments. He set up the nursery. He bought 2 identical soft blankets from a shop on Queen Street West, but as her body changed and the pregnancy moved into the 3rd trimester, he started coming home later. Twice a week, then 4 times, then most nights. He texted from somewhere else. "Don't wait up, big day tomorrow." And she would fold the extra laundry and turn out the lights and tell herself this was just a season. She noticed the perfume. Light, expensive, not hers. She said nothing. She was 36 weeks pregnant on the night of a government infrastructure gala at the Fairmont Royal York. The right contacts, Reed said. The right timing for a deal he was assembling. Noemi wore the only dress that still fit, a dark green wrap she'd owned for 2 years. Her ankles had been swollen for a week. They arrived together and separated within 10 minutes. She stood near the bar with a glass of sparkling water, watching the room the way she watched waiting rooms. Cataloging. That was when she saw the woman across the ballroom. Jenna Vidal moved through the crowd the way certain people do, as though the room existed to carry her. Auburn hair, a champagne-colored dress, a social ease that looked practiced and perfected over years. Reed crossed the room toward her with his posture straightened and his hand already extended. The way they greeted each other was not the way colleagues greet each other. Noemi watched Reed put his hand at the small of Jenna's back, watched Jenna lean in to say something that made him laugh quietly, a sound Noemi hadn't heard from him in months. Her water glass trembled slightly. She left the gala without finding Reed to say goodbye. She took a cab home, one hand resting on her belly, and she sat on the edge of the bed for a long time without undressing. Something had shifted inside her, not dramatic, not loud, just a quiet, permanent repositioning of where things stood. She did not know yet that what she had witnessed would become the first piece of evidence she would eventually hand to a judge. The weeks after the gala moved like cold water. Reed came home late and left early, and in between, he occupied the apartment like a stranger who had learned all the right habits but forgotten the reasons for them. One evening, Noemi made his favorite roast chicken, a thing she'd done since the first winter of their marriage, and set the table and lit candles and waited. He walked in at 11, looked at the table, with the candles burned a third of the way down, and opened the fridge. "I already ate," he said. His phone buzzed. His whole face changed. Softened, sharpened, went private. He turned slightly away to type a reply with the concentrated, careful energy of someone writing something they didn't want read over their shoulder. She didn't have to ask who it was. She found the receipt 3 days later, folded in the breast pocket of a jacket she was taking to the dry cleaner. A dinner for two at a waterfront restaurant, dated the same evening he'd told her he had an overtime call with a Vancouver client. The bill was nearly $600. Her hands did not shake when she found it. She was past shaking. She was afraid. Not the useful kind of fear that came with bad shifts, the kind that had edges and protocols and something to do. This was slower and more formless. The kind that comes from understanding the situation is worse than you have allowed yourself to know. At 36 weeks, the twins came early. Reed was in Mississauga for a site meeting. The cramping started in the evening. Noemi told herself it was Braxton Hicks, made chamomile tea, put a podcast on. By midnight, it was not that. She called him. Voicemail. Called again. Voicemail. She called 911 with hands that were very calm considering everything. The paramedics were kind. In the elevator, one of them, a young woman with dark braids tucked under her cap, held Noemi's hand without being asked. Noemi kept saying that her husband was probably on his way. He'd probably just missed the calls. The paramedic said yes, probably. Her daughters were born at 3:47 and 3:51 in the morning. They were small and needed oxygen and were placed in incubators, while Noemi lay in a hospital bed and listened to the machines and waited. Reed arrived at 6:30, shirt wrinkled, jacket over his arm, his hair slightly disheveled in the specific way of someone who had slept somewhere he shouldn't have. The first thing he said, "I had my phone on silent. You didn't have to call 911. Something inside Noemi, not dramatic, just quiet and final, went very still. The weeks that followed were their own kind of survival. The girls were in the NICU for 9 days. Noemi was there every morning before the shift change, her hand pressed to the incubator glass, talking to them in a low voice about Moncton and the ocean and things she was going to show them. She named them in that room, in the soft fluorescent light, alone, Sabra and Fen. Reed visited twice. The nurses noticed. One of them, an older woman who had been working the NICU for 20 years, brought Noemi a blanket and a coffee one evening and said, without preamble, "You know we have a social worker on staff. You don't have to carry all of this by yourself." Noemi said thank you. She wasn't ready yet. When the girls came home, she hoped the weight of them, real, warm, breathing in the apartment, might change something. It didn't. Reed worked later. He complained about the noise. He slept in the guest room, claiming he needed to be sharp for presentations. Noemi ran on 2 hours of sleep and the particular adrenaline of early motherhood and the growing fear that she was slowly disappearing inside her own life. One night, walking the hallway at 2 in the morning with Fen against her shoulder, she passed Reed's home office. The door was half open. His voice, low and warm and private, drifted through the gap. She caught one word before she kept walking. Jenna. She held her daughter tighter and kept moving, and for the first time she let herself think the thought she had been avoiding for months. I have to leave. I just have to figure out how. The night she found the truth did not announce itself. Reed had a dinner. He always had a dinner, and Noemi had put the girls down and was moving through the living room in the quiet that followed. Reed's laptop was on the kitchen table, open, screen still glowing. He never left it open. He guarded it like it contained something he couldn't afford to lose. She hesitated, then she crossed the room. A message notification from Jenna Vidal sat at the top of the screen. She touched the trackpad. The thread expanded. Photographs. Dozens of them. Restaurants she recognized, hotel corridors, the back seat of a car, a cottage somewhere with pine trees in the window. Timestamps going back nearly a year. One from the night she had called 911 from her kitchen floor. She scrolled further. There were documents. A scanned file with her name in the header. Chartrand Halverson, post-nuptial amendment, final draft. He had handed her this in her 7th month, called it a tax update, pressed a pen into her hand while she was struggling to find a comfortable position on the couch. She had signed it without reading it carefully because she had trusted him. She read it now. It stripped her of rights to the primary residence. It eliminated her claim to marital assets. It named Reed as sole financial guardian of any children in the event of separation, pending a mental health assessment she had not known was part of the clause. The apartment tilted slightly. She stood at the counter gripping its edge, and from the nursery Sabra stirred. One small soft sound. That sound moved through her chest like a key turning. She wiped her face. She straightened. She whispered, to no one and to both of them, "We're leaving. I promise you, we're leaving." She had no money that wasn't joint. She had no family in the city. She had the beginning of an idea and the specific stubborn competence of a woman who had kept strangers alive in emergency rooms for 10 years. The next morning she went to work early. She was in the hallway between the trauma bay and the supply room when she nearly walked into Dr. Caroline Morrow, the department chief, a woman who had been practicing emergency medicine for 28 years, and who had, over the course of Noemi's career at St. Michael's, shown her the kind of steady professional regard that Noemi had come to rely on without quite naming. Morrow looked at her for a moment, a real look, not a quick one. "You've got the weight of something serious on you," she said. "Come by my office after your shift." Noemi almost said she was fine. She said yes instead. It was while she was waiting outside Morrow's office that a man she didn't immediately recognize approached her. Somewhere in his 50s, silver at the temples, a suit slightly too casual for a Bay Street lawyer and too deliberate for anything else. He said her name as a question. "I don't expect you to remember me," he said. "Cervical fracture. 3 years ago January. You were the nurse who kept talking to me in the trauma bay. You told me to look at the light above the table and keep answering you." She did remember, vaguely. The kind of memory that comes back in pieces when you stop trying to force it. His name was Felix Tremblay. Family law, civil protection. He slid a card across the air between them. Pro bono work for people who had no one in their corner. "I was in the building yesterday for an unrelated matter," he said quietly. "I heard your name. Something made me think I should find you." He paused. "I don't know what you're dealing with, but I know what it looks like when someone is carrying something they cannot carry alone." She looked at the card for a long moment. "Can we speak somewhere private?" she said. Felix listened to everything without interrupting and without writing anything down until she stopped talking. Then he exhaled slowly and said, "Your husband has been building a legal case against you since before your daughters were born. You need to move before he does." He outlined what she needed to do in a sequence she memorized on the spot. Photograph every document she had found. Open a separate account at a different institution. Move small amounts gradually. Prepare a bag for the girls. Record everything, his absences, his words. Every night she had called for help and received nothing. Keep the file somewhere he could not access. And then, do not confront him, not even the edge of one. He has to believe nothing has changed. He told her there was someone else she needed to talk to. Someone who understood the specific kind of man she was married to. He meant Caroline Morrow. Noemi had not known. She had worked beside this woman for 3 years and had not known that she had once been married to someone who had tried to use the courts to erase her. Had not known that the department chief of an emergency unit in one of the country's largest cities had spent years rebuilding from the ground up after a man like Reed had tried to take everything. Morrow told her that evening, in the same quiet office, with the same composure she brought to every hard conversation. I lost 2 years to that process, she said. I'm not letting you lose any. She opened a drawer and produced a folder. Contacts, shelter network listings, encrypted communication tools, a step-by-step relocation guide she had been updating for years. She said she'd put it together just in case long ago. In case of what? Noemi asked. In case someone I cared about needed it, Morrow said. The weeks that followed were the strangest of Noemi's life. She moved through her days performing normalcy with the careful attention of someone diffusing something delicate. She fed the girls and smiled across the kitchen and handed Reed his coffee and said nothing. At night, she photographed documents, moved money a few $100s at a time into an account he didn't know existed, and packed the go bag one item at a time. Birth certificates, health cards, formula, the 2 soft blankets from Queen Street. On a Wednesday evening, he came home earlier than expected and found her at the nursery dresser, a small pile of folded clothes on the change table. He looked at them, then at her. Were those packed? He said. I'm reorganizing, she said. Her voice did not waver. The girls have outgrown the newborn sizes. I was sorting them to donate. He studied her with the calculation of a man who was accustomed to reading contracts for hidden intent. She met his eyes and showed him nothing. Don't make a mess, he said, and went to his office. When she heard the door close, she let herself breathe. On the kitchen table, his open briefcase held a file folder with a visible tab. Custody, preliminary strategy. She did not read it. She did not need to. She texted Felix one word that night, tomorrow. At 5 in the morning, with Reed still asleep. Noemi dressed in the dark and lifted Sabre from her crib, and then Fen, settling both girls against her in the carrier. They stirred but didn't cry. She pulled the bag from the back of the closet where she had hidden it behind winter coats for 2 weeks. Felix had told her, Reed left the building between 7:05 and 7:20 every weekday. The concierge shift changed at 7:30. She had 13 minutes. She sat in the kitchen with her daughters, breathing warmly against her chest, until 6:58, and then she moved. At 7:09, Reed emerged from the bedroom, dressed, and already checking his phone. He poured coffee from the pot she had made. She had made it, one last ordinary thing, and picked up his keys. Don't let the girls nap too long this afternoon, he said, not looking up. They'll be up all night. She said okay. She watched him leave. She counted to 30. She picked up the bag, picked up her daughters, and walked out the door. In the lobby, the concierge, a man who had always been kind to her, looked up from his desk. Morning walk, he said. Doctor's appointment, she said. Early one. He held the door. The street outside was gray and cool, the kind of October morning that smelled like wet pavement and the beginning of something. She turned east and walked 2 blocks and saw the dark sedan Felix had described, engine running, a woman in the driver's seat. Her name was Giselle Renault. She ran a private foundation that Noemi had not known existed 6 weeks ago. She reached back and opened the rear door. You're all right, Giselle said, as Noemi folded herself inside with both girls. You're all right now. The city moved away behind the windows, and for the first time in longer than she could exactly name, Noemi felt herself breathe without calculating what the next hour would cost her. She did not know then how long the road would be. She didn't know that Reed would file for emergency custody within the week, or that Felix would have it denied within 72 hours on the strength of her documentation. She didn't know that Jenna Vidal would leave him quietly when the investigation into his financial conduct began. Or that 2 years later, she would stand at the front of a conference room in Ottawa, presenting triage research to a full auditorium, and look up from her notes to find Reed Halvorson in the fourth row, older looking, his composure thinned to something that barely held its shape. She didn't know any of that yet. She knew only the car, and her daughters against her, and the highway opening ahead toward Halifax and a house Giselle had arranged. A small one with a yard and a wood stove and a window that looked out over the inlet. When the custody hearing came, 10 months later, in a bright courtroom with tall windows and a judge who had clearly read every page of the file, Noemi sat beside Felix, with her hands folded and her breathing even. Reed's lawyer argued that she had fled without notice, had deprived him of access, had acted erratically in the months after the birth. The judge looked at Reed over her reading glasses for a long, unhurried moment. "Mr. Halvorson," she said, "the documentation before this court suggests your wife prepared this departure over a period of months in direct response to circumstances you created. The coercive financial instrument she was misled into signing, the documented pattern of abandonment during the birth of your daughters, and the preliminary custody strategy that preceded any formal separation proceedings. These collectively describe conduct this court considers serious." She set down her pen. "Full physical and legal custody is granted to Miss Chartrand. Supervised access for the respondent. Reviewed in 6 months. The court further orders restitution including legal costs and retroactive child support." Reed's chair scraped back. He said her name. Noemi looked at him. She held his gaze for one calm, even moment, long enough for him to understand that she was not afraid of him, had not been afraid of him for some time now, and then she looked away. She gathered her coat and walked out of the courtroom into the winter afternoon. Sabra and Fen were waiting near the courthouse entrance with Giselle, bundled in matching red coats that Noemi had found at a consignment shop in Halifax in January. When they saw her, Fen raised both arms. Sabra made a sound that was almost her name. Noemi crouched down and held them both. "We're okay," she said, into the warm space between their small heads. "We are completely okay." She meant it in a way she hadn't been able to mean anything in a very long time, not as reassurance, not as performance, but as plain and solid fact. That small, ordinary certainty was the thing she had crossed through everything to find, and now that she had found it, she intended to keep it.